The dining room in our Boulder home glowed with late summer light. My father, Bernard Hale, lifted his glass toward my younger sister across the table. "Vanessa is the very picture of responsibility and success," he declared, warmth rolling off every syllable. "She never needs help. She makes her own way." Vanessa smiled like she'd been waiting for the spotlight all evening. The pearl studs, the crisp white blouse, the watch with a minimalist face, everything about her looked curated for an article titled, "How to Look Like You've Made It." I cut a piece of roast chicken and kept my gaze on the plate. Compliments for Vanessa had become a family sport. I'd learned the rules: listen, nod, swallow. Dad set the glass down, still beaming. "Your sister climbed the ladder the old-fashioned way. Punctual, well-dressed, real management experience, none of those, what do you call them, mere little computer side projects. I'm Mira Hale, 32, and according to my father's taxonomy, side projects is what you call work that doesn't come with a receptionist desk or a name badge." Across from me, Vanessa tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and let the praise land unchallenged. "Look at the results," Dad pressed on. "Her apartment, her car, the way she carries herself. Independent. That's what matters." The candles crackled softly. I reached for my water. I'd had this conversation, this monologue, really dozens of times. The lines were familiar, the beats well worn. Dad adored what he could see. He distrusted what he couldn't. Vanessa's success was visible keys on a ring receipts on a marble countertop shopping bag stamped with tasteful logos. Mine lived on dashboards and spreadsheets and purchase orders and shipping reports he never asked to see. "Thank you, Dad," Vanessa said, perfectly gracious. "I've worked hard to be self-reliant. It feels good." Self-reliant. The word tipped like a coin in my head and clinked against last week's memory. Vanessa on my couch. Eyes rimmed red, whispering about due dates and balances, and how she just needed a little more time. I transferred the money from my phone while she watched the screen, promising to fix things soon. Soon had a way of moving. Some people, Dad said, cutting a glance at me, mistake flexibility for a career, but Vanessa proved stability still counts. I put my fork down. The silver made a clean, honest sound against the plate. "Then it's settled," I said, keeping my voice steady. "If Vanessa is truly independent, she won't need me to cover $4,000 every month anymore." For a breath, the room forgot how to breathe. Vanessa's smile faltered, then vanished entirely. Dad blinked like a man stepping from sun into a tunnel. "I'm sorry," he asked, frowning. I folded my napkin carefully, as if the ritual could soften what was coming. "I've been transferring $40,000 each month to help Vanessa stay afloat. Rent payments, the odds and ends that keep showing up. If she's as self-sufficient as you say, I'll stop." Vanessa's chair scraped the floor. "Mira," she said under her breath, "we agreed not to what Dad's voice sharpened, not to tell me." The air picked up an electrical edge. I could feel the familiar geometry of our roles shifting in tiny clicks. Vanessa looked at me with a plea I had seen before, the one that said just a little longer. Dad looked at me like I had started speaking a language he didn't know. "This isn't the time," Vanessa tried, glancing at the candles, the linen, the planned ease of the evening. "It's exactly the time," I said, calm but unmovable. "You keep calling her independent. Independence doesn't come with a monthly invoice." Dad's face changed. Not anger yet, but something wary alert. He reached for his glass and didn't drink. Vanessa pressed her lips together and stared at the table as if numbers might rearrange themselves into a solution if she avoided eye contact long enough. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list the dates, the transfers, the nights I'd stayed up reforecasting my own cash flow to make room for hers. I gave the simplest fact and let it sit between the three of us like a sealed envelope none of us could pretend not to see. "Vanessa," Dad finally asked, not looking away from me. "What is your sister talking about?" Vanessa swallowed. "Can we talk about this later?" "No," I said, and I felt the floor of habit give way beneath our feet. "Later is how we got here." The candles guttered once, then steadied their small flames, holding fast. No one reached for the chicken. No one tried to change the subject. The evening had found its hinge, and we had just turned it. For a moment, nobody moved. The candles held their breath, tiny flames caught between quiver and steadiness. The dining room that had felt curated for harmony linen porcelain, a roast sweating herbs, had turned into a room full of edges. Vanessa, Dad, Bernard asked again, voice leveling out the way he used to speak to students when he wasn't sure if they were lying or just lost. "What is your sister talking about?" Vanessa's hands were folded so tightly on the tablecloth that the pearl of one knuckle went white. "I told Mira it was temporary," she said carefully. "I was reorganizing my budget." 2 years is not a reorg, I said. My voice sounded steady to my own ears, which surprised me. Inside, a tremor moved through the old scaffolding, the beams that had held up our family roles, whether they deserved to stand or not. "It's a system." Dad shifted his gaze to me, then back to her like a metronome measuring a tempo none of us wanted to play. "Is it true?" he asked, not looking away from Vanessa. "Has your sister been paying your bills?" "I've been paying some gaps," I said, unwilling to let the words pad themselves in comforting cotton. Rent when the timing slid. The car when there was a surprise service. Minimums when the minimums multiplied. On average, $4,000 a month. The fork in Dad's hand stopped halfway to his plate. He set it down gently, as if the metal could shatter. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked Vanessa. Vanessa drew a breath. "Because you have a very specific idea of what success looks like," she said softly. "And I thought if I could just hold on long enough, I'd grow into it." Dad's brow tightened. "Grow into what exactly, Bo?" She swallowed. "A version of me that wouldn't disappoint you." The honesty landed with the dull thud of a heavy book closing. I looked at my sister, not past her, not through her. For a flicker of a beat, the old ache rose up 12-year-old me, flunking out of ballet because I liked books more than mirrors. 16-year-old me, told to ditch computer club because no one gets hired to sit in a hoodie. The ache passed. What remained was a clear line. "This isn't about love," I said. "It's about math." Dad pinched the bridge of his nose, then looked at me. "Show me," he said. "You said there are transfers. Show me." I pulled my phone from the side pocket of my dress and unlocked the banking app. A trail of numbers marched across the screen. Dates, amounts, confirmation codes like little badges for every day I decided to be the net below an acrobat who never once looked down. I turned the screen so he could see. "Recurring on the 3rd, I said. "Except when the 3rd fell on a Sunday. Then it moved. A few extra transfers around holidays. That's all of it." Vanessa stared at the phone, as if it might start pleading her case. "It wasn't just shopping," she said, voice quivering. "I covered work clothes with it. I met clients with it. Stop," Dad said gently but firm. "Let's not turn a spreadsheet into a poem." His eyes swept over the entries with a kind of slow dread, then lifted. "Mira," he said, "why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew what would happen," I said. "You would make it about my choices. You would say that helping her enabled bad habits. You would find a way to be disappointed in the person who is quietly preventing a catastrophe because it didn't look like the solution you would have chosen." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Something almost like hurt moved across his face. "You didn't give me a chance. And you didn't ask for one," I said. "For 2 years. The silence that followed wasn't the brittle kind. It was heavy like soil after rain, ready, but unsure of what would take root." Vanessa shifted in her chair. "Dad, I've been working hard," she said, as if the phrase could absolve the sum total. "I'm salaried. I manage inventory scheduling conflict in the back room. I'm not pretending to be a district manager. I just couldn't afford to look like anything less." Dad's eyes flicked to the watch on her wrist, then to the tiny initials stamped on her handbag's clasp. Not accusation, just noticing, as if the room had suddenly turned up its resolution. "Appearances are expensive," he said. "They are," she said, eyes wet. "And people treat you differently when you look like you belong. Doors open. Mistakes get forgiven. Rent gets negotiated. Promotions get whispered." I tried to keep all the doors open until I could walk through one on my own. "You kept them open with your sister's money," Dad said, and it was not a question. Vanessa nodded once, tiny like a surrender flag that wouldn't quite unfurl. I lifted the phone again and tapped into settings. The recurring transfer tile sat there blue and undisturbed like a calm lake. I could feel both of them watching. The screen asked if I wanted to edit pause or cancel. "My business can't keep absorbing this line item," I said. "More importantly, I can't keep absorbing the story that goes with it." I pressed cancel. The phone gave a soft haptic click. There was no sound effect to mark a turning of a life, just a tiny vibration and then a gray line where blue had been. Vanessa made a sound I'd only heard once before from behind a closed bathroom door the first week she moved into her own place. a raw, childlike wound of sound that didn't know whether to be private or public. She put both hands over her face. Dad reached for his wine, then hesitated. The stem slipped from his fingers. The glass fell sideways into the plate, shattered and bled red into time and fat. He flinched, startled, then laughed once short, disbelieving. "Well," he said, voice calmer than his hands. "There it is." I stood up, napkin in hand. "I'll get the broom," I said. "No," he said quickly. "Sit, please. I've got it." He disappeared into the pantry and came back with a broom and a dustpan that always looked ridiculous in his large hands. He swept slowly, almost ceremonially, as if the floor were a ledger and he was dragging a line through a column none of us had wanted to total. The small shards made a sound like distant rain. When he was done, he set the broom aside and took his chair again. He didn't pour more wine. He poured water. "Help me understand," he said to me. "What do you actually do day to day? Not the titles, the work." Vanessa's head jerked up. "Dad," she whispered, wounded. He held up a hand. "I am not diminishing anything," he said. "I am asking a question I should have asked a long time ago." I felt something unclench inside my chest. "Okay," I said. "I'll keep it simple." I told him about supplier calls at odd hours, because the factory worker whose hands know the feel of our tent poles lives 8 time zones away. I told him about forecasting models that learn the rhythm of a hiking season better than we can, and still get surprised by an October snowstorm. I told him about landing pages that fail because a headline breathes one beat too long before the verb. About how we don't sell nylon and aluminum so much as confidence that a weekend won't be ruined by a broken buckle. How returns teach you more than sales. How the most important line on a P&L isn't revenue, but repeat revenue. His eyes didn't glaze. They sharpened. He asked questions like a careful student. Who holds inventory risk? How do you prevent copycats? What happens if shipping rates spike? I gave him honest answers, not the smooth PR kind. Sometimes the container costs eat our margin. Sometimes an influencer's audience doesn't convert the way their agent swore on a yacht that it would. Sometimes we choose slower growth because speed breaks people. People, he echoed. Vendors. A customer's my team. Me, I said. Speed breaks people, and then it breaks trust. He leaned back thinking. And this, he said, nodding toward the phone that still lay between the breadbasket and the water pitcher, sits on top of all that. For 2 years, yes, I said. Vanessa wiped her face, leaving dark tracks where mascara had surrendered. I'm sorry, she said, looking at me instead of Dad. The words fell without defense around them. I kept thinking I could catch up. That's the lie. Catching up. I kept moving the finish line to a month I could never actually reach. I looked at her, and for the first time that night, let my anger step aside to make room for something older and harder to hold. I'm not angry that you needed help, I said. I'm angry that you built a stage out of it and asked me to operate the lights from behind the curtain while our father applauded your performance. Her mouth trembled. She nodded. I did that, she admitted. I wanted to be the story so badly that I forgot it wasn't really mine. Dad's voice thinned. Vanessa, what exactly do you bring home each month? He asked it with the clinical tenderness of a doctor asking where it hurts. She named a number. Not shameful, not extravagant. A number that could carry a person if they let it walk, not sprint. And your rent, he asked, the car. The card minimums, she added them up. The math did not apologize. It sat there correct and indifferent. We have to adjust. Dad said to no one and to all of us. Not stories, not Instagrams, proportions, real ones. I can move, Vanessa said quickly, as if a solution had been hiding under the table all along. There's a place off 30th. It's older, no in-unit laundry. But it's honest. Honesty has a smell, Dad said softly, and then smiled at himself because he knew how ridiculous that sounded. It smells like pine sol and the neighbor's cooking, I think. Vanessa laughed, a tiny cracked thing, but a laugh nonetheless. The sound lifted the room a millimeter. I reached for my water. There's one more piece, I said. We're not going to pretend that doing this was noble on my part. I didn't set boundaries because I didn't want to play the bad guy. That's not generosity. That's fear wearing a halo. Dad met my eyes. There was no flinch there, no defensive raise of the chin. We all participated, he said. I delivered the monologues that made the lie comfortable. Vanessa nodded vigorously. And I decorated it, she said. I made it pretty. A timer on the oven clicked some ghost setting from a Thanksgiving gone by. The room exhaled. Okay, Dad said, setting his palms on the table like a man ready to sign something binding. Here is what I propose as a starting line, not a solution. Vanessa, you and I build a budget tomorrow. I'll sit with you while you call the card companies. We'll move the car or lose it, whichever makes more sense. We'll get you into a place your paycheck recognizes. He turned to me. Mira, you and I want to understand your business as a father, not as a skeptic with an 80s job catalog for a brain. If you'll let me, I'd like to show up to the parts of your life that don't have a tie rack. Not to give advice. To witness. The word landed in the center of me, heavy and warm. For all his mistakes, my father did not offer small things. Okay, I said, but on my terms, no rescue narratives. No patron saint of entrepreneurship speeches. You get questions. I get to say not now when I'm working. Deal, he said. Vanessa's eyes moved between us, glassy and intent. Can I say one thing without it becoming an argument, she asked. Dad nodded. I nodded. I'm scared, she said. Not of moving or scrubbing my own bathroom or losing a car I can't afford. I'm scared of walking into work looking less and having people treat me like less. I'm scared of the world that is built to see the watch first and the work last. None of what she said was untrue. The world was like that frequently, lazily, expensively. You'll find out who knows the difference, I said. That's not nothing. It's maybe everything. She took a breath, and for the first time all night, her posture didn't look curated. It looked like a person carrying a bag that fit the weight of what was inside. Dad cleared his throat. For what it's worth, he said, I know the difference now. He began passing plates, the mundane choreography of dinner reclaimed from ceremony and disaster. We ate the roast lukewarm. The potatoes had gone from crisp to yielding. The salad had resigned its crunch. It didn't matter. The food was ballast. Halfway through the meal, Dad said I used to tell my students to back their claims with sources. Vanessa smiled crookedly. You going to ask Mira for citations? I already got them, he said, nodding at my phone. But I'd like context. Who are your customers? Not the segments, the people. I told him about the couple who had gone car camping every summer for 20 straight years and sent us a photo with a note that said our stove boiled water faster than the one they'd been loyal to since 2004 and how it made them feel like time wasn't only taking. About the single mom who hiked every other Sunday and left product reviews like journal entries teaching me more about durability than any lab test. About the retired firefighter who returned a tent with a tear and an apology note as if he'd betrayed it, and how we stitched it, sent it back, and told him both of them had earned the scar. Dad listened, eyes shining the way they did when the music at a community concert got unexpectedly good. Those are the sources, he said softly. Those are the citations. Vanessa chewed her lip. I don't have sources, she said. I have sales targets and a manager who thinks anxiety is a motivational tool. I looked at her. You'll get sources, I said. They're the moments when someone notices you did a thing that mattered. You can collect them anywhere, even in a store that pays you bare minimum for more than minimum effort. She nodded, and the nod wasn't performative. It was a small contract with herself. After the plates had been cleared and the table wiped after Dad insisted on vacuuming the last glitter of glass from the grout, he walked us both to the front door like he used to when we were kids, making sure the night had hands to hold. On the porch, the air was cooler than it had any right to be in late summer. The flat irons were black shapes against a sky turning itself back into stars. The neighborhood murmured with sprinklers and dogs, and a television laugh tracked the benign domesticity of lives in progress. I'll text you in the morning, Vanessa said to me. About the budget and other things. I'll answer, I said, but remember boundaries. I will not become customer support for your life. Her smile was brief but real, understood. Dad put a hand on each of our shoulders, awkward and lovely. I'm sorry, he said, for the speeches, for the assumptions, for making you both bend into shapes that made me comfortable. Apology accepted, I said. On the condition you practice asking and listening. Teacher's homework, he sighed, smiling, fitting. We hugged like people relearning a language they'd grown up speaking but had gotten out of practice with. I got into my Civic and sat for a minute before starting the engine. My hands were steady on the wheel. I realized that somewhere between the word cancel and the shattering of a glass, I had stopped being the keeper of the secret and become the keeper of myself. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced at the house in the rearview mirror. Dad stood in the doorway, one arm around Vanessa. For the first time in a long time, I believed our home could be a place where truths didn't have to whisper. The drive back to my apartment was short and quiet. At a red light, my phone buzzed an email from a supplier in Utah confirming the new batch of titanium steaks would ship on Monday. A reply from a customer in Taos, whose lantern had arrived dented. We'd already sent a replacement, a newsletter from an outdoor magazine featuring a photo of a family under a tarp in the rain, grinning like conspirators. At home, I set my bag down and walked straight to the small office that had become the nerve center of my days. The whiteboard still held the week's sprint, onboarding a new customer support hire, switching our returns portal, testing a headline variation that used a verb first. I stood there and added one more line in blue, personal, no more invisible labor, replace with visible boundaries. I capped the marker and leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the window. The city below hummed. A bicyclist's light blinked in a soft metronome. Somewhere a train stitched a line through the night. My phone buzzed again. A text from Dad. Bernard. What's a good time tomorrow to learn the difference between gross and net without embarrassing myself? I laughed alone and not lonely. Me, 10 a.m. I'll bring coffee. You bring questions. I set the phone on the desk, then opened my laptop. The dashboard surfaced a tidy curve from the last 6 months, a slope built by decision and discipline. I clicked into cash flow. $4,000 no longer wore an alias. It was capital with a purpose now, not a drip under the floorboards. I booked a consult with our tax attorney for the international expansion I'd kept in a someday folder. I drafted a short note for the team. Heads up, testing a new shipping promise for the Mountain States. Expect higher chat volume. I scheduled it for morning, not now. The night had earned its quiet. Before bed, I stood in the bathroom and washed my face. In the mirror, I looked like someone who had done a difficult, ordinary thing and let it be both. No triumph montage, no orchestral swell, just a life nudged toward truer proportions. I turned off the light, and the apartment shifted into its soft machine hum. In the dark, I could still hear the clean click of a canceled transfer and the brittle music of a breaking glass. 2 small sounds, a hinge and a door. Tomorrow, we would start writing the footnotes that would turn tonight into something we could learn from. Not a spectacle. A record. I slept like a ledger closed at balance. At 9:58 the next morning, I parked in front of my father's house with 2 paper cups and a folder thick enough to count as a wrist workout. Bernard was already on the porch with a legal pad, a pencil, and that squint he reserves for new subjects he's decided not to be stubborn about. Progress in a face. No speeches, he said before I could warn him. Questions only. Gross versus net, I said, handing him coffee. And why cash flow is the weather report, not the calendar. We spread out at the dining table like lab partners. I opened a simple P&L, walked him through how $100 sold becomes $58 after cost and freight, $46 after marketing and fees, then something truer after payroll, and the 1,000 paper cuts the world calls overhead. He wrote as fast as I spoke, then slowed himself down, erasing the word profit when he accidentally wrote it in the wrong column. I saw the exact moment his mental model clicked the line between what looks big and what you can actually spend without setting your house on fire. He looked up at the end pencil hovering. When I joked last night about citations, he said I was half kidding. Today I realize numbers are your footnotes and the text is everything the numbers make possible. Welcome to my book, I said. Vanessa arrived at 10:30 with a canvas tote and a face you could describe as brave if you were generous or simply unarmored if you weren't. She unloaded a laptop, a shoebox of unopened mail, and a small zipper pouch whose weight telegraphed jewelry. She laid the pouch on the table like a confession. We'll do this in passes, I said. First see, then sort, then decide. We opened statements, pulled transactions, let rows accumulate into something legible. Bernard was careful, a quiet presence that asked permission before reading any line out loud. Vanessa kept finding tiny mercies she'd granted herself. Oh, that was a work lunch, and then crossed them out with a tight nod. When we moved to the calls, I coached the script ask for hardship programs, interest reductions, balance transfers that cost less than their comfort. She repeated the lines to herself, then dialed. Bernard sat back, palms flat on the table, as if learning to be furniture supportive, Steady, not the center. The car lease was the worst. Termination would sting now or bleed later. 5 minutes into the call, Vanessa, muted, looked at me and said, "If I keep the watch, I can't keep the car. If I sell the watch, I can walk to work and keep my chest from exploding every time the payment is due." "This sentence contains its own answer," Bernard said gently. She exhaled, unzipped the pouch, and placed the watch between us. The dial's face caught the morning, pretty and useless. "I bought it to feel like I'd arrived," she said. "Turns out no one arrives by accessory." We made a list for the consignment shop. We circled 2 apartments within bus lines. She chose the smaller one with the second-floor walk-up, the one that cost less and smelled faintly of pine sol and someone's cumin stew. Honesty available by the month. At 3, I checked the time. My team's daily stand-up would be starting. The returns portal migration had a feature flag waiting for my eyes. "I have to get back," I said. "Boundaries." Vanessa nodded like a student repeating a new word until it stays. "Boundaries," she said. "I can call you tonight if I panic. Text me a choice." And the reason I said, "I'll respond with a yes, a no, or a better question." Bernard chuckled. Teacher Jeans came home with a different haircut. On my way out, he followed me to the porch. I started to say, "I'm proud of you," and stopped because it sounded like I was taking credit, he said. "So I'll say I admire you. That's portable and doesn't claim the work." "Accepted," I said. 2 days later, I took Bernard to the warehouse in Commerce City. I had warned him it would be loud, fluorescent, and exactly the opposite of the myth he'd held no polished corner office, just taped lanes on concrete, and a harmony of forklifts, label printers, and impatient tape dispensers. He wore his old-school ID lanyard out of habit, and then stuffed it in his pocket, learning a new instinct. Not everything needs a badge. Mr. Hale said Tasha, our ops lead, sticking out a hand, come witness controlled chaos. He watched pickers scan bins, watched a junior associate repack a stove because she didn't like how the gasket pressed. He shook hands with Marco, who routes returns like a conductor who knows every instrument's weak read. He asked the right kind of questions. What breaks when a promo goes well? Where does morale go when freight goes up? Where do you store the stories customers send back with gear? In our heads, Tasha said, tapping her temple, and sometimes in Notion so we don't lose them. We treat them like QA. We were halfway through a tour when my phone lit with 3 alerts. Utah found a defect in titanium steaks batch, UPS hub delay in Cheyenne customer thread, heating up promised ship dates slipping. The kind of trifecta that turns a perfectly decent Tuesday into a crisis that will age you a year if you let it. Want to watch the part that never makes it into the documentaries? I asked Bernard. He nodded and followed me to the small glass-walled conference room that pretends to be soundproof and never quite is. I opened the laptop, pulled up Slack, and started the triage dance halt. The Stake SQ publish a banner to PDPs preemptively email buyers with 2 options. Wait with a discount, plus a personal note, or switch to the older, heavier steak. Get CS a template that doesn't sound templated. Bless the ops change for the afternoon to pack subkits without the steaks, but with an insert explaining the swap like we'd explain it to a friend. Bernard sat in the corner, quiet eyes moving from my screen to the floor and back, like a metronome syncing to a new time signature. When I looked up, he was smiling in this odd, soft way. What I asked, "I used to break up fights in the hallway with tone of voice," he said. "Turns out you do the same thing with words on a screen." "Speed breaks people," I reminded him, "and tone repairs them," he said. The crisis didn't end with applause. It ended with a campaign code and a plan to re-inspect the Utah batch when it arrived Thursday. Operations turned their volume back down a notch. Bernard thanked Tasha and Marco like they'd hosted us at a museum. On the way out, he said, "If I ever start a speech about real jobs, you have my permission to point at a pallet jack until I shut up." "Noted," I said. Vanessa moved that weekend. Bernard rented a small truck. I brought boxes and a timer so I wouldn't accidentally spend my entire Saturday being helpful. We carried up 4 flights because the elevator pretended to exist only every 3rd hour. The apartment's best feature was a window that framed a slice of sky the exact size of an honest thought. Bernard assembled a second-hand bookshelf with a concentration 1 notch below surgery. Vanessa scrubbed cabinets until their resignation gave way to something like acceptance. We ate takeout on the floor. The cumin from a neighbor's pot seeped under the door and made us all a little happier than our furniture warranted. Vanessa held up 2 mugs. One chipped, one not. "This can be my aesthetic for a while," she said. "Chipped, but clean." "Make it a hashtag and I'll disown you," I said. She laughed. It didn't sound cracked anymore, just human. Monday. She walked to work in sneakers and changed into flats at the loading dock, like a magician whose trick is telling the audience how the trick works. Her assistant manager raised eyebrows at the watchless wrist. A sales associate asked if she was between looks. She tried an experiment. She told the truth in one sentence. "Trying a budget that belongs to my life. No lecture, no apology." She texted me at lunch. "No one died. Also, I ate the staff cereal and it tasted like humility." That evening, she sent a second text. I proposed a real schedule rotation instead of whoever looks busy. Manager said yes. Is competence a look? Competence is a sound, I wrote back. It's what a room does when a plan fits. A week later, Aunt Jennifer hosted dinner her way of making a space wide enough for new patterns to walk without bumping elbows. She greeted Bernard with a grin that said, "I told you so," without the pettiness, and kissed my cheek like I was a person she'd wager on with her own money. During dessert, Bernard cleared his throat and stood, then sat immediately, learning mid-motion that old reflexes needed new manners. No speeches, he announced to the table, and everyone laughed. Just an acknowledgement. I mistook costume for competence. I treated my daughters like mirrors for my comfort. I'm late to the right story, but I'm here now. Jennifer raised a glass. "Being on time is overrated," she said. "Being present is useful." Dad looked at me. "Mira, will you tell Aunt Jennifer about your Utah Steaks debacle? Only if I also tell her how we fixed it," I said. I walked through the problem and the response with the same tone I'd used with my team, clear and sentimental, a little proud of our restraint. Jennifer nodded like a general, reviewing a map that had fewer arrows than ego demands and more than survival requires. Vanessa spoke next, unprompted. "I sold the watch," she said, "terminated the lease, moved, ate cereal, proposed a rotation. I've had a headache behind my left eye all week that I'm learning to call adjustment instead of failure." Jennifer squeezed her hand. "Headaches pass," she said. "Muscle stays." On the drive home, Bernard texted. "I put a post-it on the fridge that says ask. Then listen. If it falls off, I'll staple it to my forehead." "Tape first," I wrote. "We learn in layers." By the second Friday, the Utah Steaks had arrived flawless. Customers who'd waited wrote replies that used the word integrity as if you could do customer service with it alone. CS screen share metrics, usually a slog of numbers, turned into a small staff meeting where Tasha read 2 notes out loud and cried exactly 1 tear before threatening to fire anyone who mentioned it. Vanessa's manager, a woman with a weakness for perfume samples and a strength for spotting untapped capacity, called her into the office. She braced for a rebuke about the flats. Instead, she got the rotation works. Keep doing that. Also, you're good at holding the floor when customers spiral. Train 3 people next month. Vanessa texted me a picture of an index card training agenda. No exclamation points, which I took as the clearest sign she was treating this as work and not performance. That night, I walked into my apartment and didn't automatically open my banking app to make sure a transfer had cleared. The habit had been replaced by a different one. I checked my international folder. A reply from a distributor in Munich had landed. I read it standing in the kitchen, sweater still on the door, half open to the city's ordinary noise. "Ja, let's test a small run this fall." The sentence glowed like a streetlight and felt just as practical. I forwarded it to Bernard with one line: "Gross is the big number, net is the bathroom remodel." He sent back a laughing emoji, then a question about VAT that deserved its own graduate seminar. I added taxes international to a Monday list and closed the email. The boundary lived not as a wall, but as a fence with a gate I controlled. Before bed, Vanessa called, not to panic, to report. "I had a moment at lunch," she said. "An old coworker asked where I'd been shopping. I told her, the consignment store of my former self." She laughed. Then she told me she's drowning in her own cards. I pointed her to a script. "How'd it feel?" I asked. Like telling the truth cost less than I thought she said. Like the watch was heavy in ways I hadn't measured. We were both quiet, a soft kind that lets something finish arriving. "Hey," she said finally, "can we make Sunday budget a thing for a while?" 30 minutes. I bring the numbers. You bring the questions. Deal, I said. No sermons, just citations. When we hung up, I thought of the dinner where a glass shattered, and a transfer slowed into silence. Tonight there was no broken noise, just 2 apartments cooling at the same rate, under the same indifferent sky. In one, a father wrote, "Ask then listen," on a fresh post-it again. In another, a woman laid out 3 index cards for a training she hadn't had the confidence to imagine. In mine, a folder named International held a small green light. The story hadn't become a triumph montage. It had become a series of decent choices made early enough to matter. Recalibration, not reinvention. Adjustment headaches, not shame migraines. We weren't finished. We were simply finely proportioned to the truth. By the time the first cold front threaded through Boulder, our new rituals had muscle memory. Sunday budgets took 30 minutes and no more. Bernard's post-it. Then listen was still on his fridge, now dog-eared the way good habits look when they're used. Vanessa had 3 index cards pinned above her desk. Bills, choices, next step. Mine was a single line on the whiteboard. Boundaries are upkeep. On a Thursday morning, Vanessa ran her first training. She stood in the stockroom with a clipboard and the steady voice she used to borrow. When a customer spirals, she told the new hires match their urgency with clarity, not volume. She demonstrated by taking a return that wasn't technically eligible and drawing a border around the exception so it didn't become policy. Afterward, her manager said, "You made the floor quieter," and handed her the schedule with a blank square labeled lead. Vanessa snapped a photo and sent it to me without captions. The room in my chest that used to hold dread filled with a quieter thing that didn't need a name. My own week bent around a small experiment, our Munich distributor's first pallet. The VAT spreadsheet was uglier than sin and smarter than me by half. Bernard came over with a pencil and the humility of a student who wants to pass on merit. We worked through the form like it was a logic puzzle, and he grinned when the numbers balanced. You know, he said, this is just grading with different stakes. I didn't tell him the pun was terrible. I let him keep the victory. Saturday brought the outdoor expo at the fairgrounds, a lattice of tents, coffee, steam, and people who carry pocket knives with opinions. We'd rented a modest booth. Tasha stacked stoves in pyramids. Marco taped a strip on the floor that said, "Line forms here, stories welcome." Bernard wore a Mountain Peak t-shirt, one size too big, sleeves rolled like he was auditioning for summer. Vanessa came straight from a shift flats and a tote hair pulled back into usefulness. Customers arrived the way weather does. Gradual, then all at once, a retired couple told me our kettle had turned their September into teas plural when the campground's tap went out. A college kid asked if we'd look at his bent pole, and if we couldn't, could we at least tell him it wasn't his fault? We replaced it on the spot and told him it was exactly 50% his fault and 50% wind, which made him laugh in relief. Halfway through the morning, a man set a tent bag gently on the table. "You stitched this," he said, tapping the seam where our repair team had made care visible. The scar held in a storm that broke our neighbor's brand new one. He slid a photo across the table, rain like strings, his tent bowed, but unbroken, his wife giving the camera a thumbs up. Bernard stood a beat longer than necessary, as if learning a new way to applaud. Not long after, a former co-worker of Vanessa's hovered at the edge of the booth. I recognized the stance, the social media caliber of posture, curated to look casual. She glanced at Vanessa's wrist, found no watch to measure herself against, and looked up too quickly. "Hey," she said, "haven't seen you at the usual places." "I moved," Vanessa said simply. "Cheaper rent, better sleep." A blink. "You, I'm okay. Getting there," she said. I made a rotation that actually works and taught 3 people how to hold the floor. Turns out competence pays better than interest. There was a silence that had options inside it. The woman chose one I liked. "If you ever want to split a bus pass, I've been pretending I can afford parking." Vanessa smiled. "Honesty's on sale," she said. 2 for 1. When the lunch lull arrived, Bernard took the cash box and, unasked, began making change with the serenity of someone who had graded late essays in rooms full of noise. A neighbor from his street wandered up, the one who used to collect his speeches about real jobs like 90-minute podcasts he hadn't subscribed to. The man bought a lantern, then said, "Heard good things about your daughter's company." Bernard nodded and said simply, They're true. I had to learn what truth looks like when it doesn't wear a tie. No performance, just a sentence that fit. Vanessa drifted to my side and watched a teenager practice unfolding a stove until he did it without apology. I think I like being useful more than being impressive, she said. Same price, I said. Better return policy. In the afternoon, an email chimed. First EU orders shipped. I showed Bernard. He tipped an imaginary hat to the VAT cell that had given us both a headache, then wrote net-nap on his legal pad and underlined it like a man who had earned his joke. We packed the booth as the light got that late-day honesty you can't fake. The fairgrounds smelled like hay and diesel and sugar. Vanessa carried a crate like it was a badge. Bernard loaded the car and then quietly picked up a stray zip tie, the kind of small order that suggests bigger order is possible. Back at my apartment, we ate chili from a pot that had been thawed and thawed again. We used mismatched bowls, a casual inheritance. Vanessa set her phone face down. Bernard poured water into 3 glasses and didn't reach for wine. The room was ordinary in the way you wish more rooms would be unremarkable right-sized. I've been waiting to feel like we're fixed, Vanessa said. I think the feeling is actually fitting. Tailoring beats magic, Bernard said. I thought of the glass that had shattered weeks ago and the tiny click of a canceled transfer. I thought of the pine saw hallway in Vanessa's building and the cumin from the neighbor's pot and a post-it that had managed not to fall. I thought of the tent scar a stranger had shown us and the way his voice changed when gratitude found the right size inside it. Vanessa rinsed bowls. Bernard dried. I stood at the window and watched a runner stop to tie a shoe with irritation and then relief. Outside, a dog barked at nothing and then reconsidering it something small enough to ignore. Life persisted not as plot twist, but as practice. Before they left, Bernard handed us each a small envelope. Don't panic, he said. It's not money. Inside was a photocopy of a page from his old classroom manual. At the top, he'd written in pencil, Revision is respect. Beneath it 3 lines, ask to learn not to win. Name the work, not the costume. Keep what fits, hem what doesn't. Vanessa tucked hers into the back of her phone case. I pinned mine to the whiteboard under boundaries or upkeep. The paper didn't match my board's tidy rows. It looked right anyway. At the door, we hugged like people who had not solved everything and would not pretend to. Bernard kissed our temples the way he had when we were small and afraid of weather. Sunday, he asked Vanessa. Sunday, she said. Cards calls choices. He turned to me. Monday, he asked. Munich margins may be a nap, I said. He grinned, then caught himself before a speech formed and said only good. When the door closed, my apartment returned to its soft machine hum. I washed the last spoon, wiped the counter, and sat on the couch without a dashboard in my lap. The window held a square of night the size of an honest thought. On the whiteboard, the new paper fluttered once in the vent's breath and stayed. We weren't finished. We were fitted. And the truth finally didn't have to whisper. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.